I lifted the lid of the plastic storage bin marked anniversary, do not open, and a velvet ring box tumbled out from beneath the paper lanterns. It bounced once on the hardwood, flipped open, and a delicate gold band winked up at me from the floor like an accusation. There was a tiny tag tucked inside, white, neat, with my husband's handwriting on it, and the words were not my name. The tag said, "For E, my name does not start with E." I stood there with a string of bunting tangled around my wrist and $1,000 question cracking open in my chest. The house smelled like lemon cleaner because I had been rushing to get ready. The caterer was due at 4, the first guests at 6. I had a slideshow queued on a USB stick. I had ordered a cake with our wedding photo printed in frosting. I had hidden the RSVP cards in the closet so my husband wouldn't see. I had spent 3 months planning the surprise he always said he hated because he hates being the center of attention. And now, I was the one who couldn't breathe. I picked up the ring box with hands that didn't feel like mine and tucked it back into the bin as if returning it to the dark could rewind a clock I suddenly remembered forgetting to wind. I told myself maybe E was for Emerald, maybe E was for eternity, maybe E was for something cute I had forgotten we once called each other. But the tag was not generic. The tag was a name in shorthand, the tidy habit he uses on grocery lists. The way he labels the keys on the hook in the mudroom, I have seen that E before. Not in this house, in his phone sometimes when we sit on the couch and he scrolls faster than he thinks I can read. A single letter on the top of a thread that never opens when I am near. I used to tease him about abbreviations, and he would kiss my forehead and say I'm just old. I write short. Now the letter felt like a whole dot. I set the bin on the dining room table and lifted out paper fans, tea lights, the handmade banner our daughter shipped from Seattle with the words, 35 years of us, in glitter script. The banner stuck to my palm as if letters could cling to their own promise. I told myself I would ask him calmly. I would wait until after the party to avoid a scene. I would put feelings in the freezer like soup and reheat them later when no one was watching, but a voice older than my self-control said the word later in a tone that sounded like a closed door. I slid the ring into the pocket of my cardigan and checked the time. 2 hours to caterer, 4 hours to guests, 10 seconds to either pretend or change everything. The door from the garage creaked and I jerked like a teenager caught where she shouldn't be. My husband called out that the ice had been bought and the cooler was in the trunk. I swallowed the taste of tin and said, "Perfect, thank you." I watched him walk in with the same careful gait I have known for decades. The knee that complains on rainy days. The shoulders that lift a little higher around birthdays because he never knows what to do with attention. He put the bag on the counter and kissed my cheek. He smelled like aftershave and sunshine. He glanced at the decorations and laughed. A real laugh. He said, "You promise no circus." I said, "Just a small parade." He opened the fridge, reached for the lemonade, and somehow I heard the sound of a ring box hitting the floor even though it hadn't. I told myself to breathe like the therapist taught me after my sister died. In for 4, hold 4. 4, out for 6, I breathed around the word E. We have been married 35 years, minus the months we thought we wouldn't make it, plus the days we never talk about because they belong to no calendar. We have survived 2 kids, 1 dog, 2 layoffs. A mortgage rate so high in the 80s we ate rice and beans 3 nights a week. His mother's long goodbye, my father's short one. We were never flashy. We were the kind of couple who laughed quietly and left early, who packed lunches and paid off the car a year ahead of time and celebrated with pie. People say we look like we still like each other, and that is true most days. So, what does a single letter do to a life built out of grocery lists? I kept setting out tea lights as if my hands could outrun my mind. He asked if I had seen the lighter, and I said check the junk drawer, and he did and found it and smiled at the mess. And I wanted to cry because even our chaos has labels. I told myself there were only 3 explanations. The ring was for me, and the E was a code I would understand when he explained it. The ring was for someone else, and the E was exactly what I feared. Or the ring was for something I could not yet imagine. I tried to conjure innocence, and it came dressed as confusion. Who buys a ring the week of our anniversary and hides it in the decorations bin? Who writes for E and then comes into the kitchen to slice limes with clean hands? He didn't look like a man building a lie. He looked like a man looking for the bottle opener, but he has always been good at tidiness. He keeps receipts in chronological order. He alphabetizes the spices. He folds even the dish towels into rectangles that would impress a drill sergeant. Anyone can fold a life if they practice enough. The line in my chest tightened. It felt like someone was measuring my ribs for a suitcase. The caterer texted that she was 10 minutes out. I texted our daughter that the slideshow was working. I texted our son that no, I did not need more chairs. I stood at the sink and washed my hands for no reason. My husband carried the cooler to the patio and fussed with the umbrella like a man who'd been promised shade. I followed him outside and watched him fuss. The maple out back threw gold on the grass. It was a day that would photograph well if anyone was looking. I said, "Do you have a minute?" He said, "Always for you," his face open. I reached into my pocket and felt velvet under my fingertips. I pictured myself holding it up like a lawyer holds up Exhibit A. I pictured his face changing. I pictured my voice breaking. The neighbor's mower coughed to life and a bird scolded and the world insisted on continuing. I tucked my hand back into my pocket and said, "Never mind. I'm being dramatic." He shrugged and smiled and said, "You dramatic? Never." And then he went to check the grill propane because he is the kind of man who checks things twice, and I am the kind of woman who notices. Our neighbor, Ruth, leaned over the fence the way neighbors do when they want to be helpful and nosy at the same time. She said, "Do you need an extra table?" I said, "Maybe." She said, "I can bring my folding one." I said, "Thank you." She narrowed her eyes the way friends do when they hear a wrong note. She said, "You okay?" I said, "I'm fine." She looked at me for a second longer and said, "You're not." I said, "Later." She said, "I'll be here at 6. Bring an appetite and your truth." She winked and I managed a laugh. I have always loved Ruth for her bossiness. She made me join the walking group after my knee surgery. She made me drink water at the block party when I would have chosen wine. She made me remember my own spine when I let it soften. I watched her walk back across her lawn and wished the party had been planned at her house instead of mine. The caterer came with trays that smelled like lemon and garlic and rosemary. She set them on the island and asked where to plug in the warmer. She said this menu was a good choice, light but indulgent. I wanted to say I have made a terrible mistake. I wanted to say take the food away and bring me answers instead, but I pointed to the outlet and smiled and said it looks wonderful. My husband hovered at the edge of the kitchen and made small talk about the weather. The caterer asked if we needed ice, and he said I bought extra. He is good at extra. He is good at making sure no one empties a bowl before there is a replacement. I watched him be good and wondered who taught him to be that way, me. Life, or a woman whose name starts with E. At 4:30 our daughter FaceTimed from her airport gate. She said, "Show me the banner." I held up the glittery words, and she clapped like a child. She asked if Dad suspected anything, and I said not a thing, which was true in an entirely wrong way. She said, "I wish I could be there, but flights are ridiculous." I said, "We'll stream the toast." She said, "Tell Dad I love him." I said, "I will." She said, "Mom, are you crying?" I said, "No. The light is weird in here." She squinted and said, "Is everything okay?" I said, "Everything is wonderful." Then I changed the subject and asked about her dog's new trick. I have always been able to talk about dogs when I cannot speak about people. At5 a text buzzed on his phone on the counter. The screen lit up with the single letter E. I didn't mean to read it. I didn't mean to move closer, but my eyes have a mind of their own when my heart is in danger. The preview line said, "Everything set for tomorrow. 10 a.m., same place." My stomach pitched. Tomorrow is our actual anniversary date. The party tonight is a decoy to keep him home and surprised. Tomorrow we had planned to sleep in and eat leftover cake for breakfast. Tomorrow at 10 a.m. he apparently has an appointment at the same place. I picked up the phone and set it next to his keys. The good wife reflex. I tucked the single letter back into its place like a librarian who knows where all the secrets live. He came in and saw me near his phone and smiled and said, "Do you need to call the kids?" I said I already did. He kissed my temple and said, "Thank you for doing all this." I looked at his face and tried to find the outline of a stranger in the map I have known for 3 decades. I found laugh lines, a sunspot I tease him about, a scar on his chin from the time he tripped on the curb and caught the lemonade instead of himself. I found a man I love. I also found a letter in my pocket that felt like a blade. At6 the doorbell began its campaign. Friends with bottles. Nephews with noise. Ruth with her folding table and her raised eyebrows. I smiled and hugged and deflected and lit candles and pretended the air wasn't heavy with my uncertainty. My husband told the same joke he tells at every gathering, and it got the same pity laugh it always gets. I handed him a plate, and he said he wasn't hungry yet. I said you will be. He winked. Ruth pressed a paper cup of seltzer into my hand and said breathe. I said I am. She said breathe like you mean it. I did. I breathed in rosemary and lemon and a decision I had not yet made. The decision was this. Do I ruin the party to save my pride? Do I wait and risk waking tomorrow in a life I don't recognize? Do I put my hand into the lion's mouth tonight, or do I wait until morning when the circus has left town? I made it through the first toast. My husband said thank you to everyone and made a joke about being surprised, even though he can always tell when I've moved the silverware. People laughed. I watched his hands, a little shake on the glass, nerves, or the echo of a secret. He looked at me when he said I couldn't have done any of this without her, and the room awed in unison because we are that couple. We are the ones who still slow dance in the kitchen. We are the ones people point to at church when the homily turns to covenant and weathering storms. I felt both seen and unseen at the same time, like I was being thanked for a role I no longer knew how to play. After the toasts, I slipped down the hall to our bedroom. I closed the door and leaned against it. The ring box burned in my pocket. I took it out and opened it and stared hard enough to leave a dent in the air. It was simple and beautiful, his taste, not flashy, a thin band with a small emerald set in a halo. E for emerald, whispered a part of my brain desperate to save itself. E for Emma, Elise, Aaron, said the part of me that has never stopped inventorying threats. I thought of the text, 10 a.m., same place. I thought of the caterer's schedule, the guests' laughter down the hall, the way life keeps asking for the next thing even when you want to stop the clock. I closed the box and decided I would ask him tonight when the last glass was washed. I would ask him at our kitchen table because that is where our truth has always been laid out, between the salt shaker and the stack of mail. He would either tell me something that broke me or something that bent me, and either way we would find out if our marriage is a bone or a twig. There was a knock at the bedroom door, Ruth, because of course. She slipped in and shut it with her hip and handed me a napkin with a slice of cake on it. She said, eat. I said, I'm not hungry. She said, eat anyway. Sugar is a tool. She glanced at my hands and caught the glint of the ring. She did not pretend not to see. She said, that's not yours, is it? I shook my head once. She closed her eyes for a second like a woman who has just remembered a prayer. She said, do you want to blow up your life, or do you want to confirm what you already know? I said, I don't know anything. She said, you know enough to ask. She took my hand and squeezed it. She said, ask him when the guests leave. No speeches, no theatrics. You deserve a clean answer, and he deserves a door to walk through even if it opens onto a mess. She kissed my forehead like a sister and left as if she'd dropped off a casserole. The night unspooled. Friends left with foil-wrapped leftovers. Our son called from the parking lot to say he loved us. And he was proud of us for still liking each other. I stood at the sink with hot water running and let my hands do what hands do when a heart needs time. My husband stacked plates and hummed badly. I turned off the faucet and the house went quiet. I dried my hands and turned to him and said, can we sit? He nodded and followed me to the table. We sat like we have sat 1,000 times, across from each other with a salt shaker between us. I took the ring box from my pocket and set it on the table. He looked at it, then at me. The air tightened. He said, where did you find that? I said, in the decorations bin. He closed his eyes and let out a breath like a man who has reached the edge of a map he drew himself. I said, who is E? And then I shut my mouth so the question could sit in the room without company. He opened his eyes and did not look away. He said, E is for Ellie, and the name hit me in the sternum because Ellie is our granddaughter. He reached for the box and then thought better of touching it. He said, she's 7, and she asked me last month if I would help her pick a ring for her mom. She wanted to buy her mother something real, with the money she's been squirreling away in a glitter piggy bank. She said she wanted a ring that looks like spring. Emerald, E. I kept it simple and small. I wrote for E on the tag because Ellie wanted to wrap it herself after school tomorrow, 10 a.m., Same place is the jeweler. He said I should have told you. I should have included you. But she asked me to keep it a secret because she wanted the surprise to be from her. I stared at him, and I wanted to believe him so fast it scared me. My body flooded with relief and anger in the same gallon. Relief that I was not holding proof of betrayal. Anger that I had been made to walk the length of a chasm alone. I said, "Show me the messages." He slid his phone across the table like an offering. The thread with E opened to a photo of our granddaughter in a crooked ponytail holding up a drawing of a ring. The texts were chaotic and sweet. Emojis of hearts and frogs because she thinks frogs are romantic. Screenshots of small rings. A note from the jeweler confirming tomorrow's appointment to resize and add a tiny engraving inside that said, "Love, E." Our son's wife's initials are JLW, and the plan was to put the message beneath the band where only she would find it later. I put my head in my hands and let out a sound that was half sob and half laugh. I said, "You idiot." He said, "I know." I said, "You beautiful idiot." He said, "I know that too if you're saying it with love." I nodded because I was, and I was also saying it with a ledger of grievances flipping pages in the back of my mind. The secret account and apartment that existed only in a different story I wasn't living. The decades of postponing joy that belonged to us both. The way fear dresses as prudence in middle age, and we call it responsible until it bites us. I slid the phone back to him, and then slid the ring box after it. I said, "Thank you for the truth. Next time let me be in on the magic." He reached across the table, and I let him take my hand. We sat there with our fingers interlaced and the house breathing quietly around us. I said, "What time is Ellie coming tomorrow?" He said, 9:30. She wants to pick up donuts first. Because apparently donuts strengthen the heart. I laughed and said, "She is not wrong." We sat a moment more, and then we stood up together. We washed the last pan, turned off the last light, and went to bed like people who know they will wake up and try again. In the morning, Ellie barreled in with pink frosting on her lip and a conspiratorial stage whisper. She said, "Do you still have it, Grandpa?" He winked at me and nodded. She hugged my waist and smelled like sugar and crayons. She said, "Don't tell Mommy." I said, "I won't." She said, "Not even a hint." I said, "Not even a breath." She looked up at me with all the certainty of a little person who believes the adults have already solved everything, and for once I decided to let that be true. They left at 9:45 for the jeweler. I stood at the sink with a donut and watched the maple skip freckles of light across the lawn. I realized I had spent the last 24 hours in a courtroom of my own making. I had tried a man I love. Without all the evidence, I had been ready to deliver a sentence because I was tired of waiting for the truth to raise its hand, and that is its own kind of betrayal, not of him, of the promise I made to myself to be brave and fair. When they came back, Ellie begged to show me the engraving, but then remembered it was a secret and screamed into a pillow for a full minute to burn off the excitement. My husband laughed until he coughed, and then laughed again. We ate more donuts than people our age should, and then we cleaned up the last confetti the vacuum had missed. Later that afternoon our daughter called, breathless from the surprise her own daughter had orchestrated. She cried. I cried. My husband pretended not to cry and failed that night. Just the two of us at the kitchen table again. I said, "I need to tell you something." I told him about the way my mind had run away, about the neighbor's glance, about the text preview I should not have read, about the velvet box burning a hole in my pocket. I told him I had been ready to wreck a party to protect myself and that I was ashamed and also relieved and also still a little mad. He said, "I am sorry I put you in a position to doubt." He said, "I am sorry I forgot that secrets wear the same coat whether they're holy or not." He said, "I will do better." And I said, "I will ask before I accuse." And we shook on it like two old friends who still prefer the dignity of a promise sealed by hands. Here is what I learned in a single long day. That felt like a decade. Love at our age is not about grand gestures or flawless trust. It is about telling the truth as soon as you are strong enough to carry the answer. It is about asking for the truth as soon as you are brave enough to hear it. It is about understanding that fear dresses up as prudence and suspicion dresses up as wisdom, and both will rob you if you let them. It is about remembering that a single letter on a tiny tag can be a grenade or a gift, depending on whether you throw it or open it with care. It is about cake in the fridge and donuts on a Saturday, and a kitchen table sturdy enough to hold both our elbows and our mistakes. So I will ask you, because stories like this are only complete when someone else tries them on. If you found a ring labeled with a letter that wasn't yours the night of your anniversary party, would you confront in the doorway with the guests still laughing, or would you wait until the house was quiet and the water was hot and your hands could do the dishes while your heart did the math? Would you choose certainty at the cost of kindness, or kindness at the risk of being a fool? And which version of yourself would you want to remember when the cake is gone and the lights are off, and the person you promised 3 decades to is sitting across from you asking for one more day of your courage?